Starting right now, love, just so you know.
Starting right now. Okay. So, so if you guys want to turn your cameras off, feel. Yeah.
Good evening and welcome to Living on Earth's book club event. Living on Earth is a weekly environmental news show hosted by the great Steve Curwood, now in its 30th year on public radio. I'm Ari Bernstein. I direct the Center for Climate Health and the Global Environment at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and I'm a pediatrician at Boston Children's Hospital. I spend my time trying to figure out how we can move forward on actions related to climate that afford a healthier, more just, and sustainable world. And nowhere is that mission better represented than through the work of tonight's featured speaker and the founder of Health and Harmony, Dr. Kinari Webb. As Dr. Webb makes so clear in her new book, Guardian of the Trees, conserving tropical forests is vital to the fight against climate change and to the health and well-being of the people who live in rainforests around the world. But protecting tropical forests can also protect all of us. A recent report that we produced and which was brought together experts from around the world makes clear that the root cause of pandemics like COVID-19 is spillover, when pathogens jump from animals to humans. Spillover happens when we despoil forests, particularly in the tropics. This means that we can no longer hold on to the belief that tropical deforestation is merely a cause to save species, protect indigenous peoples, or conserve molecules of carbon dioxide. When we protect forests, we protect ourselves, especially from the threat of emerging infections. If the present moment teaches us anything, it's that when faced with crises like COVID-19 or climate change, we must do everything we can to prevent the crisis from happening in the first place. We've already spent billions upon billions of dollars to try and contain COVID-19 and billions upon billions of dollars more in dealing with the consequences of climate change. We can take a different course. We have enhanced solutions to prevent climate change and pandemics, and at a fraction of the cost of the measures we use to adapt to them. Nature, human health, and our planet's climate are entwined. Dr. Webb knows this as well, or better than any other human I know. She has documented in scientific and now in her new book, Humanistic Forms, the compounding benefits we can achieve when we see forests as part of ourselves. It is an honor to have her here with us this evening to share her inspiring story and vision for a healthier, more just, and sustainable world. I want to thank Living on Earth for convening this important conversation, Steve Curwood for always bringing us important and thought-provoking conversations that are critical for understanding and acting on our world's most pressing issues. And of course, to our featured guest, Dr. Webb, for joining us. I'll pass it off to Steve Curwood and Bobby Bascomb to start the discussion.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bernstein. It's always a pleasure, and we learn so much from you when we talk to you about the things that are going on at Harvard Sea Change and the other research that you do. So I want to thank thank you and Harvard Seat Change at the T.H. Chan School for Public Health, if I've said that correctly. Also, I want to thank the Boston College Environmental Studies Program and the UMass Boston School for the Environment and the McCormick Graduate School at UMass. And as already said, I am Steve Curwood. I host the program Living on Earth and the podcast. And I want to welcome you to the LOE Book Club. This is our live event series that features authors of some of the most interesting and latest books on climate change and the environment. And in this case, an amazing, but when I first heard about this, when Bobby Bascomb interviewed her last year, and I heard the tape, I said, wow, this is something really amazing. Gave me a lot of hope. And in fact, Bobby, why don't you pick it up from here?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I'm Bobby Bascomb, managing producer of Living on Earth, and I did have the great pleasure of speaking with Kinari about a year and a half ago now, and I also left that feeling a renewed sense of hope that we unfortunately don't get too much covering these issues. So thank you so much for being here. But before we begin, I want to thank our Living on Earth listeners. We can't host these free events without your support, and thanks to a generous offer tonight from the publisher Flatiron Books, we'll send anyone who's able to donate $75 or more tonight a copy of the book, which I highly recommend. We're here with Dr. Kinari Webb, as we've been talking about. She's a physician and founder of the nonprofit organization Health in Harmony. Dr. Webb is also author of the memoir Guardians of the Trees, a journey of hope through healing the planet. And I believe Steve has our first question for you.
Well, yes, and if you're watching us now or listening and you want to submit a question, you got a couple of ways. You can go to the Q&A feature here on the Zoom circuit, if that's how you're seeing us. Also, if you're joining us Facebook Live, please comment on this with your question. So let's get started though right away. Where are you, Kinari? Where are you speaking to us from right now?
I'm in the Bay Area right now. It is such a delight, though, to hear your voice. I mean, it just brings me right back to my time living in Vermont when I listened to Living on Earth every single day, so it was just a huge part of my life. So it's great to hear your voice.
Well, great to hear your voice. And let me ask you, the health and public policy implications of what you've written about here are just huge. But this book is also a classic memoir, a tell-all about you. So why was it important, do you think, to tell readers some of the most personal parts of your story, as well as your prescriptions for healing the planet?
Well, I started off trying to write this book simply about the work that I have had the privilege to be involved in, this incredible partnership that I've gotten to participate in with these rainforest communities in protecting forests. So I started off writing just about that, but it didn't really make sense. Why did I make the decisions I made? Why did I do those sometimes very stupid things? Because I was in the process of learning, right? And we're all in the process of learning. And I realized I kind of had to convey that personal journey of healing in order to explain the more community healing and then really the global healing. And as I got deeper into that, I realized it's not just me, right? We're all on that journey. And I hope that it helps others to see that healing work about colonialism, about racism, about my own intergenerational trauma that needed healing. And I hope that as others are on that same path, it will also be helpful to them.
Oh, thank you. Bobby, of course, would love to join you sometime in Borneo. And well, Bobby, why don't you ask her about this more directly?
Oh, I really would. I am dying to go to Borneo. Before I read your book, I've always wanted to go to Borneo, and now since reading it, it's that desire is tenfold. But you write in your book that the rainforests of Borneo and Indonesia are really, very critical. Not only are they home to extremely rare species like orangutan, but the forests there actually hold more carbon acre per acre than forests of the Amazon or other rainforests, largely because of the peat soil. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so obviously rainforest is critical in the standing trees, right? Because one of the things that those standing trees do is they suck down in total around the world a third of the carbon emissions that we emit every year. So these forests are absolutely important. And the bigger the trees, the older the trees, the more carbon they suck down. So we can't lose those giant trees. And then one of the things they also do is store carbon in the soil. And as you know, it's kind of like early oil. I think about it. It's kind of these stacked, leaves and stuff in the soil. And the forests of Borneo are particularly important because they have massive, massive peat swamps. Yeah, and so it's. I don't want us to just think about forests as carbon. It's in fact very important that we not do so. But carbon is a very important function of forests. But another really important function is water cycling and biodiversity, as you mentioned, right? 50% of the world's species occur in the rainforests of the planet. And this water cycling, like some people call the rainforest the heart of the earth, not just the lungs of the earth, because of these rivers in the air. And actually the Amazon rainforest creates a lot of the rain in North America. So these fires we've been having in California are actually related to the loss of forest in the Amazon. Like we don't really tend to think about how interconnected our whole planet is, but it really is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And of course, the health of the people is so related to the health of the forest. I think, Steve, you wanted to follow up on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, how do the indigenous people in Borneo, excuse me, can't talk for some reason. So tell me, how do the indigenous people in the rainforest, how do they figure into the ecology there? Because of course your book is all about, you're not hugging trees, you're working with people.
Yeah. So when I first went to Borneo to study orangutans, I was just so angry at the local community members who were cutting down these giant rainforest trees, which might even be 1,000 years old. And I just thought, how can they do this? Don't they know that the forest is also important for their own future well-being and not just the future well-being of the whole planet? But then I got to know many of them. And it just broke my heart when I realized what they told me was going on is that they were often forced to log to pay for healthcare. And that just shouldn't be. And why do these communities have so few resources? Because of many hundred years of colonialism, right? So what I try to explain to people here in the US often is your well-being is actually dependent on the well-being of people living around rainforests. And when they are also forced to invade into forest, like Ari Bernstein was also describing, you have a higher chance of spillover for pandemics. This is not the only problem for loss of forest. Of course, we also have companies cutting down large amounts of forest, but this problem of local communities wanting to protect the forest and not able to is a serious problem in many, many places. And it's often access to healthcare, right? One woman told me, if anyone tells you that they have not logged to pay for healthcare, they are lying to you, because that is the only way to get enough money for a medical emergency, which can cost an entire year's income.
So I take it this is your inspiration for starting a group, Health and Harmony.
Yeah.
And you say at one point this is a divine calling to this work.
Yeah, it is. It is. There have been. I'll tell you, this book is also a divine calling, and if I didn't have to do it, I wouldn't. I would much rather not have released this book, but we don't have time. And this is the great period of time in probably all of human history. We either make this enormous change where we recognize that we are all interrelated and that we will not survive without each other. And when I use the word all, I mean it in the way that many indigenous communities use it. Whereas our cousins, the trees and the animals, right? We are all interrelated. And we can't survive with
Before we came on, we were talking about how, well, go ahead, ask her about it.
Well, what I think is remarkable about you, Kinari, is that you saw this problem. You saw, okay, these people are cutting down trees. They don't want to. They're doing it because they don't have access to healthcare. So the solution I can provide is healthcare, and I'm just going to go ahead and become a doctor so I can do that. And then I'll I'll start a nonprofit, and I'll direct that. And you are just saw a problem, and you found a solution. Can you tell us more about that journey for you, and really how Health in Harmony works? How does providing healthcare for people, high quality healthcare, how do you go about doing that in a way that also protects the forest?
Over the weekend, I was doing some Jedi work with this amazing woman, Jocelyn McDougall. And she described it. She said that when you realize you won the lottery, right? Like you already won it. You got the $40 million or whatever. Like you were born in the richest country in the world with as an able-bodied, full, neurotypical, et cetera, human being, right? When you win the lottery, then what do you do about it? And many people who say, if I won the lottery, I'd want to help. Well, that was what the experience for me was like being in Indonesia. Like, whoa, I won the lottery. Okay. And I didn't realize that beforehand. I came from a relatively poor family in the United States, although they are very well educated. And I just I didn't get it. But when I went to Indonesia, I got it. But those who didn't win the lottery are the ones who often know about resilience. They know about how to dismantle a system that isn't benefiting everyone. So it takes those who won the lottery working together with those who know the solutions. And that's what I decided I was going to do. I was going to listen to rainforest communities about what the solutions were. Mm-hmm. And they're usually interconnected solutions. This isn't just like one thing, it's a number of things all together. And when those things all happen together, profound change can happen. And that's what we saw at our first site. There was, over the first 10 years of the program, was a 90% drop in logging households, a 67% drop in infant mortality. We stabilized the loss of primary forests, and we had 52,000 acres of rainforest grow back. The world community invested $5.2 million in these communities over that time, including building like a $2 million medical center, providing healthcare to about 120,000 people, doing all this alternative livelihood training that they had asked for, specifically designed by these communities. And what did the communities get back? Just in the primary forests, averted carbon loss, $53 million worth of carbon, right? That is amazing, that kind of impact, right? So it's, what I talk about it as mutual gift giving. These communities have something so exquisitely beautiful to give to the world. They have forests to protect. They are guardians of the trees. They are guardians of the health of the planet. They also could use some gifts of thanks for doing this, but under their direction and control, right? This colonial method of doing conservation and doing development simply can't continue. We will not survive as a human species if we do, because outsiders cannot know what the solutions are, and they are sure to mess it up and waste a whole bunch of money, and we don't have the time. And they can do worse than waste money. But under the direction and control of rainforest communities, when they say exactly what the solutions are, and then we support those solutions, profound change can happen extremely quickly. And that's what we're trying to do all over the world now. And we want to do it fast, 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 because we don't have time. I wish we had lots of time, but we don't.
Yeah, well, that's certainly true. Can you tell our listeners some of the details of how it works? How do you provide healthcare to people in exchange for not logging? What were some of the details that you worked out with them, or really that they suggested to you?
Yeah, so some of the cool things are they wanted affordable, high quality healthcare. Okay, so affordable. How do we make it affordable? Well, we could just provide it for free, but then they said if it was free, they wouldn't value it as much. But we want everyone who can, no matter how poor they are, to be able to pay for it. So the way that we did it was everyone can pay with non-cash payment options, and you can pay with seedlings. So, and if a given community is not logging at all, they get a greater thanks from the world community. So they get a 70% discount on their healthcare costs. So they have to pay with fewer seedlings. If their community is logging, they have to pay with a little bit more seedlings. But they love this because they see this direct connection, and it helps them encourage the few folks who are continuing to log to stop. So yeah, and then they asked for alternative livelihoods in organic farming training. So that's also, you can also in our clinic pay for your healthcare manure. We use that manure for the organic farming training. So there's always this visual, you can see very clearly how the health of the natural ecosystem and the health of the economic system is fully related to the health of people, which is true, right? That's just true. And it tends to be the way that rainforest communities see it, right? Everything is interconnected. But in the West, we tend to be very siloed. We think healthcare is somehow separate from the environment and somehow separate from economic well-being. But of course it isn't.
Well, you brought a bit of American barter with you. You know, here people trade in their cars. You got people, what, to trade in their chainsaws?
Did we lose you?
I don't know. We lost her? We have
Yes, you
lost
did
her.
lose me for a second,
Okay.
and now I'm back. I'm so sorry.
No,
I don't
it
know if
happens
you-
to the best of us.
So I was saying that I was asking, you know, you brought a fair amount of the American barter system with you, and by having people do trade-ins. I mean, here we trade in cars. There you have people trading in chainsaws for healthcare.
Yes, that's also true. Yeah, we do a chainsaw buyback program. This was after 10 years, after we'd gotten this 90% drop in logging household. There's these remaining loggers. And often these were guys who had logged from when they were very small children, like starting when they were like 11, 10 even. And you usually inherited their chainsaws from their fathers. And it was harder for them to switch. They were also often folks who didn't own land, and that was very unusual there. But so what we did is we started this chainsaw buyback program with them. This was designed by Dr. Monica Nirmala, who's the executive director. I should say the entire program is all 100% Indonesian in Indonesia, and we work in Madagascar, 100% Malagasy, and also in Brazil, 100% Brazilian. But Dr. Monica Nirmala, she worked with the communities, and they came up with this chainsaw buyback program to try to get these last few loggers to quit. And then the logger and his wife both start businesses, and their contribution is their chainsaw. Our contribution is some cash, and then after their business is successful, it's fully owned by them. And that's been wildly successful. We're going to get to zero within the next, I think, I don't know, maybe a year or two. We'll see.
And talk to me about their businesses. There's an element of organic agriculture that you talk about, which I have to say kind of surprised me that living deep in the rainforest, what they need to learn about organic agriculture and have the resources. But you go ahead and tell the story. Yeah, you go ahead, tell the story here.
I was like, how is that possible? You just talk to your grandparents, right? You know, but no, because the traditional form of agriculture there was slash and burn. And so you cut down a piece of forest, you plant a crop of rice, and then you keep moving and you rotate in about a 7-year rotation. And they said, look, but eventually those plots get exhausted and you need to move farther into the forest. And they said, that worked great when there was lots of forest and not many people, but it doesn't work anymore. And we heard in some other places that people know how to plant in one place without using chemical fertilizers. And we just don't know how to do that. Well, sure enough, the next door island of Java has a many thousand-year tradition of sustainable agriculture. So we could bring in experts from there who taught, like Pat Nyalem was this just remarkable teacher, and communities absolutely adored him. And it worked very, very well. And they didn't have to, that was the other thing, they were often logging to get money for the chemical fertilizers. So.
A virtuous circle instead of a not so virtuous circle.
Yes, exactly. Things were constantly getting worse when we first came. And then they started constantly getting better. And the biggest difference, I would say, is this sense of hope and agency and just like, let's tackle the next problem. And as one village leader said in a speech that I was in the audience, and there were probably like, I don't know, maybe 100 people in the audience. And he said, we are the pathfinders for where the world needs to go to live in balance with the earth. And now we want to teach the world.
Wow, that's really profound. And I think you really do have such a wonderful model here for other countries and other communities to emulate. Can you talk about, maybe the personal story of one of the people that came into your clinic that you were able to help? I'm thinking of a patient named Darty. Can you tell his story for us?
Sometimes I think about his story as a metaphor for where we all are on the planet. So Darty, his mother found us at an eyeglass distribution center when we were giving out eyeglasses one day. And she must have run the long distance to come and find us. And she's, please come see my son. So we went to go see her son. And she has a tiny little house, very, very small. And within that space, she had created this sort of even tinier little room that was completely dark. And he had been in that dark room for 8 years, suffering in horrible, excruciating pain in his head. He was also incontinent, although his mother kept him exquisitely clean. And he couldn't tolerate any noise. He couldn't tolerate any light. And it turned out that he had tuberculosis of his brain. And that is called meningeal TB, and probably had like a tuberculoma, which is like kind of a massive tuberculosis in his brain. So he was in just terrible distress, suffering extremely. She had spent every bit of money they possibly had on care and had not been able to figure out what was wrong with him. We were able to correctly diagnose him and start him on treatment. He was, in fact, our first inpatient at the clinic when we started. But curing someone, it was kind of this totally miraculous thing. We had to bring him at night and put all shades and nearly carry him into the clinic. And then we were able to give him antibiotics, the tuberculosis medicines, and also some steroids to kind of prevent any, as all the TB bacteria are dying, they can create a lot of inflammation. So we were able to treat him. Within 2 days, he is like walking. He can tolerate light. I mean, it was just, the improvement was just unbelievably dramatic. But the thing about TB medicines, you have to take them for a very long time, because even though you have this dramatic improvement right away, you really have to take your medicines. So that was a whole nother process. But then and his mother paid with non-cash payments. She paid with these beautiful handicrafts that she had made. But then even though he eventually was better physically, he was terrified. He was terrified to go outside. After being in the dark for so long, you know, it makes sense that you would just be scared, right? It's a totally new thing out there. And so then we had to have a psychiatrist come and work with our Indonesian docs to teach them how to help him slowly learn how to be in the world. And that did work. And then one day he actually asked Dr. Made, who was the doctor who's taking care of him, can I go to the beach? And for me, that is kind of like, that's where we are on this planet, right? We have been in the dark for a very long time. We are just beginning to see our interconnections. We are just beginning to see what a massive crisis climate change is. But now we're scared. Even though the truth, the healing knowledge of truth is basically here for almost all of us, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to be in the world. And there is that personal healing and that community healing that leads to the planetary healing. And eventually Darty actually got a job and he was able to support his family, and he learned, you know, he had this integrated health in all ways, with a healthy, sustainable livelihood and a sustainable family, and he could have access to continued care. That's what we need to do on our planet. We need to do the personal healing and the community healing and the global healing. And we need to listen to those who have suffered the most about what the solutions are.
It seems a tall order, but you've really given us a path forward, I think, with this book and the beautiful stories within it. Steve?
We are working, we're also working, sorry, go ahead. We're working
go.
on a platform too to really help people connect around the world so that they can, we're going to call it the Rainforest Exchange. We're pretty sure we may change the name, but that's what it looks like we're going to call it. We're planning to launch by the end of the year. Where people can see the solutions of rainforest communities and then be able to partner with them and, yeah, bring about this great healing so that the healing is visible, so we know exactly what to do.
Best practices, yeah.
And it's kind of like, yeah, getting the access to psychiatric care that we all need.
Oh, yeah. I just saw a story move on the wires today saying fully a third of us in the United States are showing clinical signs of depression this far into the pandemic. And even worse, almost 60% of us who make less than $20,000 a year are showing signs of clinical depression. So, yeah, it matters. Hey, Bobby, we were talking before about a portion you wanted her to read for us, could Bobby, could you tell her, Dr. Webb, Bobby has this reference.
Yeah.
I hope that they called and told you that this is what we want.
They did.
Okay.
Yeah. Before you really got going with your clinic and the reforestation efforts there, you engaged in something you called radical listening. You know, the notion that you want to, the members of the community, you want to go and ask them what they need and then listen to them. And that was sort of a radical approach to this type of work. Can you tell us, before you read this for us, which I think gets to that point, can you tell us a little bit about why is that a radical notion? Why isn't that done more often?
Yeah, well, you wouldn't think it'd be radical, right? I mean, I was kind of joke like the really radical thing is that we don't only listen to communities about the solutions are, we actually do it, right?
Yeah.
Because lots of organizations say they listen, or they get input about what their idea is. That's a common way of doing it as well, which from my perspective is not radical listening. Radical listening is to let go of your own control of what the answer is. To say, I trust you. I trust the local knowledge that you know what the best solutions are. And then I will absolutely bring resources from the global north. It's radical also because it is a reversal of the colonial flow of resources. And exactly execute your solutions. And those solutions can be, and it's not just like one and done, it's a constant process of like working with the communities. Okay, so how's this going? Now, do we want to adjust it in any way, and how that's going? And what is, and it's not just like the biggest part of the solutions, but every detail of the solutions as well. Yeah.
So it was a radical notion to trust that local people understood their own problems and understood how to solve them. They just lacked the resources to do that. And there's a passage in your book that Steve mentioned that I think really illustrates that. It starts on page 83. And in this passage here, you're talking with a woman at a gas station, and she tells you about how important the forest is for her health and her well-being, and for that of her community, for that matter. Would you mind to read that for us?
Yeah. And this is just like one about among 10,000 of these stories I've heard, right? But
yeah.
She said, and it's kind of funny when you say gas station. So it's like, a little roadside stand with some jerry cans full of some gas, right?
Yeah.
So we know if the forest gets all cut down, then less water flows down from the hills. And then we tend to get sick more often. You see the river over there? She points to the river. We looked over and could just see the river at the bottom of the steep banks with stilted houses along the edge. In front of each house was a small outhouse built on floating logs. She continued, we drink from that river and bathe in it. And if there isn't enough water, it's a real problem because people get sick. Plus, if the forest gets logged, we have more flooding. She then went on to tell that when her son had typhoid, they'd been forced to cut down 6 ironwood trees to get him care. God be praised. At least we were able to save his life. So what you hear in that story is that she fully understands that the forest leads to their health. Other people will describe it as, you see that hills over there covered in trees? When there's trees on that hill, the water flows down, it feeds my rice field, which then feeds me, right? Like they fully get this interconnection between the health of the forest and the health of humans. But they also understand that when they don't have access to healthcare, that means they have to cut forest, and then it makes things worse. Steve, it's exactly that downward spiral you were describing, where everything continually gets worse.
They don't have clean water. You write in your book that malaria cases actually go up when in deforestation areas.
That's right. Yeah, there's good studies actually from all over the world now showing that.
Yeah, we got a question actually from someone who's attending this session about women. She asked, I'd be curious as to how women in these indigenous communities regard the rainforest. I think you've answered that part of the question. And she goes on to say, I imagine they don't log, so what would be their perspective and or contribution to the process of saving the forest? And I know you told us, of course, of the story of Davi, is that it? No, Darty, and his mom bringing in some crafts that she had made. But tell us a little bit more broadly about how women are responding to the challenge and the opportunity that you brought to these communities.
So let me tell you about the story about Ibu Hamisa. Ibu Hamisa is one of the community health workers that we hired to care for patients like Darty. So these women would give people their TB medicines, but also treat a lot of other medical problems. So Ibu Hamisa was so beloved by her community because she had saved so many lives that she was actually elected as the village chief.
Okay.
And she, right? So,
yeah.
And then she didn't even run. They actually put her name in, and she said, someone else put up my picture, not me, right? So she was elected village chief. And then she had, of course, participated in lots of these radical listening sessions. So what did she do when she became chief? She did radical listening with her community, and particularly with the women. And the women all came up with a plan to really get the last few loggers to stop. And they did this, they started patrolling in their community. And whenever they would see someone like getting ready to go up into the forest, they would go and talk to them and explain to them why they really shouldn't do this. And and there was going to be a new organic farming training next week, and would they like to come to it? And and you can go to the clinic and you can pay with non-cash payment options. So there's all kind of solutions, so you don't have to log. And it worked dramatically, and her village became green very quickly. So there are lots of ways for women to be involved, and they are. Also in that chainsaw buyback program, we had both the men and the women start businesses, so they'd be more likely to be successful with two, businesses. But I have to say the women's businesses on average have been a little bit more successful.
Oh my goodness.
Is anyone really surprised?
Now, Bobby. You don't have to. Hey, but Bobby, you started to talk about malaria, and I know that this is a concern. I mean, the zoonotic diseases like that, and I bet you have a question for Dr. Webb at this point on this to clarify the malarial connection with her work.
Yeah, of course, as you mentioned, Steve, malaria is a zoonotic disease. That is an infectious disease that's transmitted to humans from animals, in this case, mosquitoes. Likewise, COVID-19 is very likely a zoonotic disease that's released into the world from interaction with wild animals. We've been talking here about the relationship between intact forests and human health, for this small part of Indonesia on a small scale. But how do you view that relationship globally, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, so I want to be careful, right? I don't want to blame rainforest communities for zoonotic spillover, because they're often in a position. These folks are the guardians. We want to honor and respect them, and there's some interaction that's going to happen always, which is not necessarily bad. But what you find is that when forest gets really threatened, when either large areas get cut down or there's just increased stress on the ecosystem, then animals are less healthy and therefore shed more virus, and also are more likely to invade into human territory. Right. So this is when you have intact ecosystems which have lots of biodiversity, there's little spillover. But when you have this basically ecosystems that are really on the edge, that's when you really start to have a major problem. And of course, when you take animals from their natural ecosystems, you really stress them out. And you take them to like these live wet markets around the world, and then you bring animals from all over different ecosystems, you put them all together. That's really when you get into very, very dangerous territory in terms of spillover. Yeah. So listening to rainforest communities, supporting their solutions is likely to prevent pandemics. So I gave you that huge return on investment for just looking at a small portion of the carbon, right? In just one location. But think about the return on investment for preventing pandemics. I mean, the billions and billions of dollars that we have had to spend on this planet, and the lost economic activity from just one pandemic. And because of the stress on the ecosystems around the world, pandemics are becoming much more frequent. So it's even more urgent that we centralize the knowledge of rainforest communities, we support them, and we prevent this potential for spillover.
So I want to follow up with a question that we have, and also one that Bobby and I thought we wanted to ask you, because you've had such remarkable results in Borneo, and the question is how might these be replicated in other forest communities, the Amazon or the Congo, and one of the persons who's watching us at this moment Wanted to know particularly about your experience in the Brazilian part of the Amazon, especially during this pandemic.
Yeah. So we have it's been we have known we needed to move really fast. And we knew we had a model which looked like it was working in Borneo. Well, Stanford did an evaluation. It looked very, very successful. Its data is excellent. So, but we wanted to see if it would work in ecosystems that were very different. So we started working in Madagascar. Ashley Emerson, who's our fabulous program director, she says, if we can be successful in Madagascar, we can be successful anywhere in the world because there are so many stressors and it's very, very difficult to work there. But we have so far been wildly successful. And again, with radical listening, the communities are identifying healthcare, alternative livelihoods, and education access as the key factors. And again, in Madagascar, the threat to the forest is primarily individuals who want to protect the forest, just don't have a choice, and see that they are making a choice between their short-term well-being and their long-term well-being. But what are you going to do, right? I mean, I had to cut down trees to pay for a C-section. I would do it, right? Of course I would. It's a little different in the Amazon. What you have are rainforest communities, indigenous communities, other traditional communities like descendants of rubber tappers, who are living in the forest and protecting it from invaders. But when they get sick and die, or when they have to leave to access services, they leave forest vulnerable to be invaded by outsiders, to be cut down. And occasionally they will make deals if they need. There's one man we know of who had worked his entire life to protect the forest. And then his son got really sick and was going to need long-term care. And he made a deal with a logging company who came in, right? And they paid him enough that he would be able to take care of his son. And how can you blame him? And yet, I don't want anyone to ever have to make that decision, right? So we did radical listening again with these rainforest communities and asked them what they would need. What are the solutions that they see for protecting the forest? What do they need? We call it a thank you from the world community so that they can protect this forest. And again, they needed access to healthcare, particularly during the pandemic. They needed the ability to be evacuated if they were very sick. They needed vaccines, so we have been doing vaccine trips up, and they needed healthcare trips like 3 or 4 times a year, and we've been doing that as well. They also need some help with advocating for high school for their children so that their children don't have to leave the forest. And when they can stay in the forest, they're more likely to live there for their lifetime and protect the forest. So this, and then some livelihood work as well that we're working on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you've been talking to a lot of people in the course of this book rolling out, and especially about radical listening, but I'm wondering if you've gotten this question. How do you bring what you learned with radical listening home to America? Because we have a society where instead of cutting down trees, people are burning or extracting fossil fuels, investing their retirement accounts in fossil fuels, and other huge things like concrete, for example, which generates a lot of carbon. Not to mention the other toxins that are so crucial to our society. Dr. Bernstein, if he were back on the circuit, would tell us that just burning fossil fuels in this country alone is costing what? Ari, I don't know if you can hear us, but something like 250, 300,000 deaths a year.
Yeah.
So how do you bring this concept of radical listening back to an America that is so broken right now? It seems like we don't listen to each other. We have nurses picketing, hospitals protesting a vaccine mandate. I mean, man, it seems to me the folks in the rainforest are in a much better shape than we are right now. Just saying.
Yeah. Well, I think actually many of the issues are very similar. First of all, there are social justice issues, right? There's intersectional environmentalism, which is to say, where are the worst polluting industries? In communities of color, right? What are the solutions? Those who are closest to the problems are going to know the solutions the best. And I believe that should be on a neighborhood basis, which is to say, every neighborhood is going to know what the solutions are for their neighborhood. And the way we do radical listening is people sit in a circle, everyone, what would you need as a thank you from the world community so that you could actually reduce your fossil fuel emissions, right? I highly suspect that access to healthcare is actually one of those key fulcrums of change also in this country. That if we had universal healthcare, I know many people would change their jobs, would choose livelihoods that were actually about thriving, right? Thriving personally and thriving globally. But they often don't feel like they can even leave the jobs that they have because of access to healthcare. I also, I don't know what the solutions would be, but I know who to ask, right? And I know that communities could come up with the solutions. And even imagine if we got discounts on our healthcare premiums if we were emitting, less fossil fuels, right? Like they should be connected. They are connected. So why not directly connect them? I bet it would work wonders.
What do you think, Dr. Bernstein?
Sure, I get off mute there. I think from Kinari's lips to our policymakers' ears, the more we've recognized just how much we stand to gain by getting off fossil fuels to the, in our case, trillions of dollars in healthcare expenditures. It's a win-win, except for, of course, the folks who are embedded in the fossil fuel industry. And in the same way that radical listening, I think, Kinari describes in the community she works with, there's this really important part of climate action that involves going into the communities where they have always relied on fossil fuels so that they can help us figure out how to move forward too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, let's bring in a Boston College student. Actually, we have a recorded question. Let me ask one of our producers here, Jay Feinstein, if you wouldn't mind rolling in this question from Helena Ebeling.
Hello, my name is Helena Ebeling and I'm a student at Boston College majoring in biology. Dr. Webb, I found your comparison between the large bustling Western hospitals and the Indonesian hospitals in Borneo extremely interesting. My question is, do you think that sharing the practices and methods of Indonesian doctors that go unrecorded would cause breakthroughs in Western medical practices? And would it be beneficial to have doctors from the biggest countries to the smallest islands collaborate to solve the world's medical mysteries?
Yes. I couldn't agree more. And we do that. So we have had a partnership with Stanford and Yale, but also folks from all over the world regularly have come to our small clinic in Borneo, where they learn about planetary health and they learn from their Indonesian colleagues how to truly treat people with love and respect and as though they are family members, and to see this patient's well-being as fully integrated with the environment's well-being and their community's well-being. Like that's not something that most doctors in the West are. He's a very unusual doctor for this, for getting this planetary health concept. But and many of the residents and senior physicians who've come just felt like it transformed the way that they took care of patients. I couldn't agree more. Yes, that interchange of knowledge around the world, it can transform our planet.
Amazing. Yeah. We have another question actually from a member of our audience, a Boston College student, also Rain Perlotta. And maybe we can roll that question in now for you.
Hi, I'm Renee Frost. I'm a sophomore at Boston College studying environmental studies, and my question for Dr. Webb is a very broad question in terms of what my generation could do for the betterment of our society as well as our environment. Because we're so hands-on in social media, I wanted to know if there's anything that you would recommend we can do to continue to spread our awareness and to spread the positivity that we can help each other in terms of social injustices as well as climate injustices. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Oh, so beautiful. And this is the thing. So many young people like really they get it. They get the intersection between social justice and environmental justice. They get how urgent these things are and they want to do something. And I so say, I don't know what to do, but I know who knows. Rainforest communities know. And okay, so the first forest where we worked around Gunung National Park, that forest has as much carbon in it as 14 years of carbon emissions from San Francisco. What one individual does in this country in terms of like riding your bike or reducing emissions, of course that's important and I want everyone to do it, especially because it creates a ripple effect, right? But it is nothing compared to what these rainforest communities can do for our planet and fast. We need to partner with them. If we're going to make it, we need to partner with them. And even if we reduce every ounce of fossil fuel emissions everywhere in the world, and we continue to lose our rainforests at the rate that we are losing them, it would still be game over. So we have to partner with these communities. And the standing forest is part of the solution. So that's why we want to create this rainforest exchange. At the end of my book, there is a declaration of interbeing. And I wrote this partly because I want people to feel, I want it to be part of a movement. And at we have a website, guardiansofThetrees.org. There you can sign that declaration. And you can also connect. There's a whole list of wonderful things that you can do. You can share that declaration and you can also partner with rainforest communities because I in the triage of the planet, that's where we need to go first.
So I'm going to ask you to read that if you have a copy handy. But before I do, the reason is there's a number of questions that we've gotten, and I'll just summarize one that we got. It is so overwhelming to hear these stories. Is there anything a low-income person can do to help? Yeah. And I think your declaration perhaps responds to that question.
There is something every single one of us on this planet can do. Every single one of us. And I just ask that you go deep in your heart and you ask what it is that what is your piece of the puzzle? Because I know you have one. Declaration of Inner Being. I hereby declare my intention to work towards a healthier and more sustainable relationship to the planet on a personal, community, and global level. I will become a force for healing and change in the face of the greed, injustice, and destruction that threaten the viability of the earth for sustaining human and non-human life. I recognize that we have little time left to switch from a path of destruction to one of thriving. I know we must all work together collaboratively to bring about change quickly. I pledge my effort, resources, skills, knowledge, and desire. The tools of this work are nonviolent reorganization, love, radical listening, wisdom, equality, justice, compassion, innovation, determination, persistence, and truth. I pledge to work across nationalities, religions, cultures, social classes, genders, and identities, knowing that only in diversity will we find enough strength and wisdom. I recognize that even the smallest actions, both internally and externally, can have profound impacts. This is not work of self-denial, but rather of enhancing and improving our lives individually and collectively, knowing that there will be enough. The colors of this work are blue, green, and white as a symbol of being united in these goals. The blue of sky and water and the green of the planet's rich vegetation honor our parent, the earth, in whose name we work. The white of clouds and snow is a sign of our willingness and desire to be visible. And as in many cultures, the white also represents the death of an old way of being. I sign here to indicate my commitment. My signature is a sign of the depth of my conviction, my desire for change, my willingness to work together, and my readiness to promote human well-being and the sustainable health of the natural world. Signed.
Kinari Webb, and hopefully the rest of us. Doggone it, the clock has just rapidly moved ahead here, and suddenly we're out of time. So all I can say at this point is thank you. Dr. Kinari Webb is the founder of Health and Harmony and the author of Guardians of the Trees, A Journey of Hope Through Healing the Planet. It looks like this. And just say, Kinari, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor. I really like your voice just is like, it just makes me feel like home.
Wow, it's so sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much. And best of luck in the rest of the work that you're doing there. It's really admirable. And for our listeners joining us tonight, thank you also for joining us. If you enjoyed this event, please consider supporting what we do here at Living on Earth by donating on our website. That's loe.org. And again, tonight we'll be sending a copy of Guardian of the Trees to attendees who donate over $75. That's courtesy of Flatiron Books. Donations to support our work on public radio and our free events like this, it's all goes to support that work. Your gift helps us support our weekly coverage of climate change, ecology, human health, and human interest stories that we've continued to bring listeners for more than 30 years.
So to keep posted on additional events, please follow Living on Earth on Facebook when it's working, Instagram, Twitter, and your favorite podcast app or your smart speaker. And do sign up for our newsletter at loe.org. So thank you, Kinari. Thank you, Ari. Thank you all for listening tonight. The best from Bobby and myself. And good night.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you.